Hey everybody, Chalice Leo here, host of Our Native Land through Czech Podcast Studios in Victoria, British Columbia. Thank you so much for joining us. My guest today is Morgan Owl Crisp. She is the president and co-owner of Seven Clans Brewing. Morgan also has a business partner, Frank Bonomo. So, Morgan's story begins when she was out shopping when she noticed Cherokee symbols that she had grown up with on merchandise, but which were not native made. It prompted her to think about the food and beverage industry where native designs and concepts are often appropriated but not native owned, and wondered out loud, why aren't we branding this? Then came the moment when she began looking at companies from all over the world that carried indigenous names and symbols but had no ties to tribes and no real thought given to what being Native American meant. Commercialization and mass marketing were separate from the people those symbols came from. This then led Morgan to begin an to being an owner and managing member of the Seven Clans Brewery in Cherokee, North Carolina. Morgan, welcome to Our Native Land.
Oh, thank you so much. Really pleasure to be here.
Fantastic. Okay, so let's start off. Although I just kind of gave a summary of your journey owning the brewing company, can you take me back and really help me understand the passion behind you creating your own beer?
Sure. I've always been in the restaurant industry. So my first job was in the restaurant industry. I've had owned restaurants, co-owned restaurants, and so I've always really loved food and that connection with food to people.
Mhm.
And I've also, the last 15 years, been part of a publishing company. It's my company, Cherokee Publications, where I've sort of been memorializing the voices of Cherokee people in our community, um, um, recording their stories, their legends, their history through books. So it was sort of this kind of marriage between those two um, interests that I have,
Hmm.
food, or in this case, beer, and storytelling. So,
Wow. Okay. So tell me a bit about, the situation you're in, because there's not an actual brewery or tap house. You kind of explained to me when we were first chatting over email that you're kind of in an unorthodox situation on how you're producing, making, distributing your beer. Can you kind of inform me a bit more about that?
sure. So, the Koala Boundary, where I'm from, is currently dry. The only alcohol that's sold there is at our casino. So, at this point, having an actual physical tap room is pretty much impossible.
Yeah.
Yeah, I started sort of this journey anyway, hoping that maybe things would change. I have no idea. Maybe they won't. I got started. I have some friends that actually live really close to me, and they own a brewery. I was kind of telling my story, the interest that I had, and they actually had some extra capacity in their brewery, and said,
Okay.
"Okay, yeah, why don't we try this?"
Wow.
So so we started a contract brewing relationship, and basically what that means is allow me to use their facility and their employees to brew our beer. And so it, it went great. I had no idea that it would be successful. We, eventually a distributor signed with a distributor, and we were selling it all over the state of North Carolina. So then, it was time for me to take another step and, you know, start purchasing my own equipment.
Hmm.
And last year, I purchased another brewery
Hmm.
because all of the equipment and everything was already there.
Yeah, it makes sense. Absolutely.
Yeah. So it's a second brand, but it's really allowed me to continue doing what I want for Seven Clans as well. So a little bit unconventional,
Yeah.
but
So are you producing that beer with your husband and then also producing the Seven Clans beer within that company? Is that correct?
yes,
Okay.
correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
I haven't heard much of that in Canada. I know there's a lot of like brewery partnerships here where, they already have established tap rooms and they just kind of collaborate together with the beer, but to actually like
Yeah.
kind of be subletting tanks, this is the first time
Mhm.
I've heard about it. That's really cool.
Yeah, I mean, the process to brew beer is super expensive, the infrastructure that you have to have. So, you know, it's not something that you just kind of what I did was just like overnight say, "Oh, this would be really neat. Maybe I can do it.
Yeah, yeah,
Maybe I
that
can do it." So,
that's true. Absolutely. So I'll tell you right now, there may be some listeners or viewers that have skepticism towards the idea of an Indigenous person who owns a brewery. Alcoholism is an ongoing problem sometimes with Indigenous communities in Canada and across North America. So, what has your reception been like where you're located? Is there any criticism towards what you're doing?
well, so in North Carolina, there's probably close to 320 plus breweries in North Carolina.
Hmm.
And most towns, small communities have probably three or four breweries each. Asheville, which is close to us, about an hour away, has 32 breweries.
Wow.
So,
And that's probably, is that a big town or
no, not really. No.
just a lot of drinkers?
Just a lot of drinkers. Yeah. So craft brewing is super popular here. It's super accessible. Um, so I think since our community is dry, I understand the reasons why and totally respect the reasons why. Um, Really, it wasn't a. I don't think it was more of me brewing. It was kind of the question of whether it's appropriate or not um, for me to talk about my culture or my native side within alcohol.
Hmm.
So that was kind of that was the kind of question that I got from my community.
Hmm.
Um, but
And
you
has
know,
this support from the community being like a steady flow of positivity kind of as it goes on, or is is
yeah,
there, okay.
it's continued to get a lot better. Of course, in North Carolina, it's been really awesome because there's been such a push where there's so many people in brewing. They want to hear those voices from minority people, um, women especially, and then um, you know Native Americans. Of course, I'm the only Native American person in the state of North Carolina that owns a brewery, and I'm a woman.
Hmm.
So I think there's probably maybe less than 5% of those breweries that are actually woman owned.
Hmm.
So for me, having that representation is just amazing. I can go in a big box store and see, the brand there among, so many um, a male dominated industry.
Hmm.
It's really awesome.
That's really cool, and I'm really happy you're getting support in any way, shape, or possible. Because I know even
Hmm.
for Indigenous entrepreneurs, because I've been an entrepreneur for most of my life on and off, so a lot of these grants and supports that you can get financially for an Indigenous entrepreneur, as soon as there's any mention of alcohol, it's like 20 steps back. We're not going to touch this project, right? So
Yeah.
I can understand the frustration and the hard work it takes to get where you are. So that's really, really impressive.
Thank you.
So obviously, unfortunately, due to geographical reasons, I can't try any of your beers. But I noticed on your website, you have the Seven Clans Blonde Ale, which seems the most representative of an indigenous symbol on there. It has a beautiful painting of a Cherokee woman on the can. Can you maybe tell me the significance of having, that Cherokee woman front and center on your product or your
Sure.
can?
So I have a can for you.
Oh,
You can,
yes.
yeah.
I'm glad you read the email. I really wanted to see it.
Yeah.
Cool.
So this is a representation of Shaylu. Shaylo is our legendary first woman.
Hmm.
And so for me, being the first in this industry, and kind of coming to realization about my own in my own journey of being a Native woman and what that means, I just felt like she was super fitting. Her she's the mother of corn, so the creator gave her this gift to be able to produce corn from her body
Hmm.
to feed sustain her family, and of course generations after that. So especially that ties into women in agriculture, the huge responsibility that women had in agriculture, and how that um, how that translates into brewing and the brewing process. So it just made sense for me that we depicted her on our first can.
Yeah, that's incredible, and that's what really attracted me to wanting to reach out, because I knew there was probably more reason to that, but behind the can too. And I think we run in a
Hmm.
lot of situations where there's these indigenous symbols and products, like you said, but that there's no actual native representation behind it. So I'm glad I looked into that a little further.
Yeah.
Trick question: do you brew it with a bit of corn?
Yes.
Ah,
Yes.
yes, that
So
makes me
yeah,
happy.
yeah, yeah. The corn adds just a little bit of creaminess to it,
Yeah.
and then of course for symbolic reasons, it was just absolutely necessary.
Nice. Now, does
With
that
the
ship well so me and Kyle can get a bunch of cans here?
yes,
We'll pay for the
I
shipping. We'll figure this out.
yeah, we'll figure it out.
Okay, awesome. Okay, so I noticed online when I was doing some research that you ensure to employ a lot of Indigenous women within the brewery. So you've touched on this already. Why is it important to you in Seven Clans that you're really putting a focus on hiring Indigenous women or women in general?
Well, well, it's not really a new notion for me because all of my other businesses I've had have always employed Native women as much as possible. But I think because there's just so few Native people in the industry, I want to help facilitate, new jobs for people,
Hmm.
not just for Native women, but just women in general in the industry, I believe.
Okay. And now that we're talking sort of about employment and the economy, obviously COVID-19's took a big hit all over around
Hmm.
the world. So how have you been dealing with that situation?
Well, we were closed down. When we actually purchased the tap room that we have, we were closed that same day.
Oh,
We were
wow.
closed
That's so
down. Yeah.
rough. Yeah, there's a
Yeah.
couple businesses here in Victoria that like were literally opening restaurants as they were supposed to be closed.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we were closed for a few months, but it really helped me kind of get my feet underneath me. I really needed that time to just kind of go through our equipment and brew and just get in there. But we've had a really successful year. We've got such great people that are with us, and I'm just really thrilled.
Mhm, absolutely. So the other you're brewing the beer other on so you're brewing the beer under the other company name. So what is the name of the brew company that you're doing it under?
Well, the tap room is Frog Level Brewing.
Frog Level Brewing.
Um,
Okay.
right. So it's just two separate brands.
Hmm.
We
Is
we
there labeling for Seven Clans, like you can kind of tell it's both, or you just brew the beer there and you keep the frog kind of front and center?
Yeah, the Frog Level has their own brand,
Hmm.
their own core beers that we have. It's not in distribution, and then Seven Clans is totally different. I mean, we basically just brew the product there, but the packaging is different, and they go through different distribution, centers.
Okay.
So
Uh,
they're totally separate. Yeah.
Absolutely. Okay. Now, do you have this vision of creating more of a an indigenous or native sort of vibe as time goes on? If
Uh,
Seven Clans gets this whole thing to themselves, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. So the last year, I've been really um, doing a lot of research myself, being out in the wild, getting familiar again with all of our native plants and figuring out ways that I can um, you know uh, forage ethically and
Hmm.
sustainably so that I can include some of these ingredients in my beers and some of
Hmm.
the small batches. But for a tap room, I want it to be an immersive experience, food, your artistry, everything totally native. And
Hmm.
I'm hoping that I'll get to do that someday, in the community where all of this was inspired from.
That's
So,
amazing. I'm excited to see where you go. That's for sure. So the idea of Seven Clans. Can you explain for our mostly Canadian listeners who are curious about the Cherokee Nation? So let's kind of talk about where you're from. Is the seven tribes combined into one? Are they separate? Can you tell us a little bit about your background?
yeah, so Seven Clans refers to our clan system. You get your clans from your mother.
Hmm.
And so that's a little bit separate. There's three different not brands, bands
Hmm.
within the Cherokee Nation. So there's the Western Band, which is out in Oklahoma, the Kitawas, and Eastern Band, which is what I'm a member of, the Eastern Band of Cherokees. So we were one nation at one point.
Hmm.
We Cherokees had existed in about seven, I think it was seven different states.
Hmm.
The Indian Removal Act, of course, sent most everybody to walk along the Trail of Tears to Oklahoma. The Eastern Band um, were were is made up of just a few hundred that hid here in our beautiful mountains and the Great Smoky Mountains, and were able to stay here. So that's where there's a separation of people.
Okay. And now I was kind of, you're talking about the casino and the only place where they can do liquor sales there too. Are you selling your beer out of that liquor store as well, just as sort of a symbolic way of doing so?
Yeah, they definitely had us have us there. Our relationship with the casino actually kind of and helped lead us along.
Hmm.
Kind of the inspiration, especially for our Seven Clans Blonde, was for it's for a really approachable craft beverage. A lot of people weren't drinking craft beer
Yeah.
at the casino,
Yeah,
so it
I
was
can see
really
that. Yeah.
kind of a crossover style beer. So they really fostered that first beer for us for sure.
I still can't believe that there's 32 breweries in that one town. That's just like, well, there's some towns here where like, is there really only two here? Like where, but
Yeah,
like, and then if there's five, we're like, okay, it's a little too much. Like it's
yeah,
wow, 32 is
32.
crazy.
Yeah, yeah,
So let's casual it down a bit more. Maybe I know you showed us the can on the blonde. Do you have a couple more that even if you can't show us, or if you do, great. But I just want
yeah.
to learn some more.
Yeah. So the another one that I have is the second beer we did. It's called Hop Rooted.
Ah, okay.
It's a West Coast IPA. So it's really balanced with your hops and your malts, but it's dry hop, so it's a little more. It's got a little bite to it.
Mhm.
It's a little floral, and what was really interesting about why I picked this can art is because it reminds me of my father and my grandfather. So we used to shake trees.
Mhm.
So I don't know if you're familiar with hemlock trees,
No, not very.
but yeah, so they have these little seeds, these little seed pods, and we would actually, to earn extra money, we would climb trees and shake the branches so these
No
little seed
way.
pods would come out. Yeah.
Okay.
So we would gather them and then bring them back to the house, and we would kind of sift them, get all the debris out with old window screens.
Mhm.
And then we would have these gallon buckets of seeds that we would sell to farmers.
Mhm.
And I just remember, as a kid playing in that, just picking up all those bunches of seeds that we had, that we worked so hard for and that was going to give us extra money, and just
Mhm.
being so appreciative of, what the land gave to us
Mhm.
and, our relationship with it. So that's really where that inspiration came from.
Nice. Can you describe the before we go to the I think you got one more beer there, but before we go to maybe describe a bit more the art on the can that you're talking about, just for the listeners who aren't actually looking.
Yeah, so it's basically it has hands, but it has the hops in there.
Okay.
So that was just reminds me of my grandfather, my dad, and
It looks,
working the earth.
yeah, yeah, that's what I think. It looks like kind of like grabbing some dirt out of Mother Earth and it's
Hmm.
kind of dripping through the fingers, but it's a hop in it, which is really cool.
Yeah, they just really gave me that sense of place and relationship to the land, and
It made me think a bit about being uprooted, like I mean
mhm.
there's some indigenous tribes that have had to get up and move for whatever situation. So that it gave me that symbolic thought in my mind too, right?
Yeah,
Yeah. You got one more. I know you do.
yeah. So yeah, so this is Bended Tree. It's a chestnut brown ale. So chestnuts have been a part of our native history for forever, and of course Appalachian history. It was really neat to get to brew with it. I think I'm maybe the only chestnut beer. I've never seen anybody else do it. Um, but so the imagery on this can is really about the bended trees, about these navigational markers that you could find on the trails here,
Okay.
and it was kind of call to action for people to kind of um, stop and look around the place that you are and recognize, um, the people that were here before,
Mhm.
the signs that they have left, and sort of like acknowledge all of the great things that Native Americans have left for us.
Mhm.
So that was kind of the inspiration behind that one.
Mhm. Well, I'll tell you something, Morgan. Like I said, there's probably a bit of skepticism about, the whole idea of tying in any kind of indigenous culture to alcohol. But if there's anybody who's taken the appropriate steps, being careful on how to do it, and really consulting and making sure that how it is done is in a respectful manner, I think, in my opinion, you've done it phenomenally. You're doing everything right. You're giving some respect to the land. You're getting as much support as you can, and you really have a good reason why you started, and you're continuing that reason. And I can tell just by how you talk and your passion that you've really put a lot of thought into it. So I'm
Mhm.
really happy that I found you online here and that I was able to share your story.
Oh,
It's
thank you
amazing.
so much. It's always great to be able to share a story. Sometimes, when you can see it on the shelves or people talk about it, you don't understand kind of the heartfelt and how sincere it is for me. Um, so I'm glad I was able to share that with you.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I said, I don't know how we'll do it. I'll e-transfer some money, but we'll see how good that beer travels.
I'll make sure you get some.
I love to taste it. Yeah, we'll talk about that for sure. Morgan, thank you so much. I appreciate everything you said today, and thank you for being on our native land.
Thank you.